He's asking what cuisine he likes. And so the cop is confused. He's like, yeah, I do like Mexican food. It's like, I tell you what, brother, when I get done from here, and you get done from here, I want to break my fast with you. The guy who's abusing him, Pancho goes up to him and just showers him with love. The police officer doesn't know what to do because it's his job to handcuff this guy and take him back in. But he goes in the back and he starts to loosen the handcuff. And he treats all the other college kids with empathy. And that Pancho, when you talk to him about that experience, you say, what was that? He said, it wasn't activism. It wasn't me versus another. It wasn't this cop versus me. It was oneness. It was a sense of we are one. I feel your pain, you feel my pain, and in that oneness, let's come to a higher place of intelligence. That's what we call giftivism. So Pancho now grows up, a little, and moves to Oakland. Oakland, one of the poorest places, one of the most violent cities in the whole United States. He moves there, and he's asking this question, how do you bring more compassion in the world? The Pancho asking that question versus all of us who have read a lot of books and know a lot of theoretical knowledge, very different. So how would Pancho respond to this question of bringing compassion in a community? So they are, to give you an idea of the kind of space this is, I have known people who said, oh, I want to go visit Pancho, I want to go to this place, so you can post on your Facebook profile that I have been to Oakland and I have seen this, and so people go there, and there was this one, he holds these meditations every Wednesday over there. He holds it on Fridays, he calls them Wednesdays on Friday. So they go there, and they pull up in their nice car, and mom says, I want my daughter to have this experience of this city, and she should know what tough life is. On the way, she sees a guy pull up a gun and just shoot at another guy. She's never seen a shooting in her life. This is a human being taking out a gun and shooting a fellow human being. She couldn't even look for parking. She went all the way back an hour back home. She couldn't even get out of the car. This is that kind of neighborhood. Pancho, in this kind of neighborhood, says, I want to shine the light of compassion here. In his home, their home, just on the border of two gangs, which are constantly fighting. You constantly hear gunshots over there. He says, we're going to leave the doors open. And he says, we don't need help from outside. We need to birth something from the inside, from our own community. So one time they were there, and they hear this, somebody took an alcohol bottle and smashed it to the ground. Usually people run away as soon as even in that community, people are afraid. So they run away, and they're going in. Pancho and his roommates, they run out. They said, and they start picking up these pieces of glass. And those there were three kids that smashed this super loud just as a prank. They're over there, they're watching. They didn't call the cops. They said, we're going to fix it. They just start picking it up very humbly. Those kids are over there, they watch this, and they said, what's going on? Who are these people? Why are they picking it up? And initially there was a gap, but then pretty soon they start coming forward and coming near. And they're like, what's going on? And they start, they speak in Spanish there. And they said, well, I don't know if you know our neighbor here, but our neighbor has a little 1-year-old. And that 1-year-old sometimes goes out running. And so when you guys smashed this, we just thought that the neighbor's kid might come out and might get hurt. So we're just picking it up. No judgment, no like you were wrong to do this, And she has a 1-year-old, and the 1-year-old comes out, and this is our neighborhood, let's pick it up. They live on a street called Fruitvale. It's called Fruitvale because it used to have a lot of fruits. So they said, let's go picking fruits. So on some weekend day, all the fruit goes waste because they're just busy trying to survive. So they get a bunch of volunteers in the community and let's go to her house and let's pick the fruits. And people pick the fruits. What do we do with the fruits? Let's gift it to other people. So we go to your rich community and we say, this is fresh, local, ultra-local, organic apple from Oakland. Not just the recipients of our charity from the outside, but people who are now contributing, people who are now giving, with just the assets that they had in their community. This same guy, Occupy movement, you guys must be aware of the Occupy, there was a massive Occupy movement in the US, where everyone said there's the inequity in the world is getting to be too much. So let's protest. And so people would protest. So there was the 99% versus the 1%. And so in the Occupy Oakland became the first example where people who were protesting were up against there was a heavy chance, let's put it that way, there was a heavy chance that there would be violence. And so the police didn't want that, so the police show up in big force. Because if there's violence here, maybe there would be violence in all the other cities across the US. So this is just last year. So Oakland became the first big case of what would happen when the people, 99%, like the movement of the 99% clashes with the police force, right? Will there be violence, will there not? Everyone said Oakland is very violent. So at night, all the rhetoric is like building up, you know, everyone is stepping up the violence. Police are saying we're going to spend X million dollars and we're going to have like helicopters, we're going to have full force and riot gear, and they're like really stepping things up. And all the sort of anarchists and people in that community are pushed by that, and they say, we're going to step things up in a different direction, and let's see what they, you know. And in the middle of all this, Pancho and his roommate, Elijah, there are 4 of them, the 2 of them, said, you know, it was midnight, we got to do something. If people are stepping up the violence in the world, we have to step up non-violence in the world. We have to step up the love. So they decide that they're going to go to that place and meditate. And they were just going to meditate. And we said, we'll take our, you know, we'll see what happens, right? So they go there, and they start meditating in this space. And there was this iconic photo that went viral. It was all over the news. Millions of people saw it. You might even recognize it if you saw it. Of these 2 guys, this Mexican guy, this African American guy, meditating. And the police force in full gear behind them. It's like, we're going to take it down. They took him to jail for a day, nominal. Offense read, disturbing peace. There was no violence at all that day. Because they got 18 other people to meditate there, and all the folks that were going to create were going to be violent. They decided to not do anything that day. It made a huge impact. It changed the whole narrative of the whole Occupy movement in the United States. All they did was meditate in the space. Now Pancho is a big fan of Gandhi, and so it just so happened that this was a Monday, and Pancho is in silence on Mondays. So if you see the photos closely, they're going in to arrest him, and Pancho puts a little note. He does this every Monday because he doesn't speak. As people come and talk to him, he says, brother or sister, as he always does, I would like you to hear that I love you. And so here's Pancho. All American media is like flashing. There's helicopters up above. There's dozens and dozens of cops in riot gear. There are 2 guys meditating, and he takes out his notepad because it's Monday, so he's in silence. So he takes out his notepad and he puts a little thing and he says, sister, I'd like you to hear, that's the most important thing, before he says what's his name, you know, because the cops are like, who are you, what's your name, so we can book you. He says, sister, I'd like you to hear that I love you. On Mondays, I'm in silence, so I don't speak. And you actually see one of the photos with him showing his notepad. I mean, this guy is like just all practicing love at all times. So how can you bring that narrative of compassion, of oneness, in all kinds of different communities where it's not there? And not just underprivileged communities, but even privileged communities. There's so much violence going on in privileged communities, except that it's very glossy, you know, so we don't realize it. But it's there, it's everywhere. So to give you an introduction of me, and then maybe we can take some questions, and then I'll frame you guys somewhere in between. I run an organization called ServiceSpace, which essentially says, how do we create deeper connections in our community? How do we use the power of love to connect hearts? And this connection of the hearts does not show up on any ledger. It's very hard because it's invisible. It's the gap between us. I always use this example of going on a train. And 20 years ago, when you go on a train and you take food, you always share with those around you. Now you don't do that because you're afraid, because you read the paper every day. And they tell you, oh my God, people are all bad, people are all mean, people are all evil, they're out to get you. And you say, well, no, I can't. So what happens when you lose that trust? Right? Earlier today, I was talking about a piece of graphite and a piece of diamond. The only difference between graphite and a piece of diamond, they're both made of carbons. Only difference is how they connect with each other, how the covalent bonds are. If you take a whole bunch of carbon and connect them in a certain way, you get graphite. If you take a whole bunch of carbon, connect it in a different way, you get diamond. So how are we connecting with each other? And if we don't connect in a wholesome, profound way, we're going to lose that generosity. We're going to lose that social capital. We're going to lose what it means. We're going to reduce what it means to be human. So we talk about 4 different shifts in ServiceSpace. One is from consumption to contribution. We're programmed as consumers. Every day, an average American sees 3,500 ads. In the US, I'm confident that you see way more than that. Right? Because here, there's no even idea. Sometimes I was at some place, and they had a poster of like, idea. I mean, it's like you just need, please, just give me one ad, you know? It's like the same ad repeated all over the place, you know? So instead of seeing the speaker, you're just seeing idea everywhere. And what is each one of those ads telling you? You are incomplete as you are. You need to get my product. And then, maybe you'll be more complete. But that's actually turns out to be a big fallacy. So how do we shift from being just a consumer to being a contributor? How do we open each door and say, I want to contribute? What do I give? Your worth is not how much you can consume. That's your worth for the GDP. But your worth is actually how much you can contribute. And if your contributions are paid forward and they are all connected, it starts to create what we call a gift economy. It starts to create what we have all experienced, right? I've helped him, I've given water to my dad so many times, but I don't keep track of how many times I've given my dad water. He doesn't keep track of how many times he's fixed my car. But I do stuff for him, he does stuff for someone else in the family, everyone like takes care of each other. And you trust that I do something for you, you do something for her, she does something for him, and he does something back for me at another time. I trust in the circle. I trust that gifts will start moving around. And as they do that, it's no longer charity. This morning at Christ College, we were talking to so many students, and one guy raises his hand and he's like, this is great, but like these are all people who can give to each other, who can afford it, right? But like, wouldn't it be better if we gave to people who couldn't afford it? Very real question. That same guy, and I told him, I said, yes, there is need for relief. That's sympathy, and we know that sympathy hasn't really worked in the world. We spent trillions and trillions of dollars on aid, but we know that aid is massively broken. So maybe we can try empathy. Empathy says we connect with each other. And that same kid actually came back, and he met us halfway, maybe after our lunch. And that kid was like, you know, I was thinking about it. Just randomly, it just so happened that he ran into us. He said, I was thinking about it, and that when you just give alms to somebody, that change stops. It's like there. But if I give to you, you give to this person, and like the generosity element keeps going, and it comes back to me, and I give a little more, it's generative. It's not a one-time solution. So how do we move from sympathy to empathy? Sympathy is good. Compassion in that form is great. But perhaps we need newer designs, because we know that that hasn't worked. So this idea of, we talk about going from consumption to contribution as one shift, transaction to trust as the second shift. Not just like quid pro quo. Trust in the circle. We run Seba Cafe, Karma Kitchen, that you guys might have heard of. You've heard of it, yeah?
I went there, Seba Cafe.
Yesterday?
No, not yesterday.
There was one in Bangalore yesterday. So, yeah, I mean, can I turn this fan on? Is that fine? I just assumed that I can. I'm taking over the classroom. Idea at Karma Kitchen is that you walk into a restaurant, your bill reads zero. It's zero because someone before you paid for your meal, and you get to pay forward for people after you. Most people think that you can't exist. You can't trust people to pay forward. You can't trust people's goodness because, you know, people are inherently evil and they're selfish. Unfortunately, this is how our whole economic system, if you ask any economist and you say, what's the basis of all your economics, he'll say two things. One is people act rationally. Two, they aim to maximize self-interest, that they are fundamentally selfish. But is that so? Probably not. I don't think so. And what's the alternative? And where are you taught that alternative? Where do you explore that? Nowhere. There's no such institutions. There's no such mechanism. So spaces like Seva Cafe, like Karma Kitchen, become places where you can explore. It becomes spaces where you can say, wow, what happens if everyone is generous? And we saw it. I'm going to put Sushil on the spot at some point and speak about what happened at his restaurant yesterday. Yesterday, right? Yeah, I lose track sometimes. He says we need to bring Seva Cafe to Bangalore. 150 people piled onto his restaurant, and we'll hear from him as to how that was different than the other 6 days in the restaurant. How when you have these invisible bonds of love, which we don't know how to quantify, and hence we don't know how to increase more of in the world, what happens? And what happens if you go into a regular restaurant and you realize that everyone is paying for each other? At the end of the day, maybe the same amount of money, but there's a lot more value that's generated. And what is that value? And how do we account for that value? Or do we even need to account for that value? These are open questions. Happens when you start to shift from transaction to trust. And the third shift is from isolation to community. This is the shift from me to we. We just think me, me, me. How can we start thinking about we? Not in a lecture sort of way, please, think about we are all one. That doesn't work. You have to give people an experiential understanding. And if people understand that, if their empathy is exercised, not just sympathy, empathy, and not just for people who have, there's a rickshaw driver. I don't know how many of you have been to Ahmedabad. You might have. Or you have not yet. Yeah, you need to. There's a rickshaw driver who says, yeah, I want to change the world. I'm a rickshaw driver. I am a statistic in the UN findings, in the UN reports, probably stuff that you guys may even study. And he says, well, this guy, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you move from the physical to the, you keep moving up, and finally, you get to safety, and you get all kinds of things, and then finally, the fifth level is self-actualization. Now, this guy's a rickshaw driver. He shouldn't be thinking about self-actualization. First, get your stuff back together, your physical act together, because only then you can move up in the world. Turns out, even the UN now says that that's a completely flawed theory. I can tell you from personal experience, because I've gone on a walking pilgrimage across, it started from the Gandhi ashram, we ate whatever food was offered, and we slept wherever place was offered, for 1,000 kilometers, 3 months, my wife and I, and it was incredible. And you realize that generosity is not a luxury sport. It is not for the privileged to exercise when they get past this whole thing. So now they're realizing that Maslow's hierarchy of needs is not so good. Actually, it's more like vitamins. You don't get all your vitamin C and then you go to B. You don't do that. You need everything in balance. So we can all practice this kind of generosity. So this rickshaw driver says, I want to practice generosity. He says, I'm going to run my rickshaw on a gift economy basis. No meters. You may think all rickshaw drivers are corrupt, because they haven't, the world is going down. Because they haven't moved up in the hierarchy of needs, so we need more jobs and we need to do all that. But this rickshaw driver says, I'm going to be an exception to that rule. And he says, I'm going to run my rickshaw on a gift economy basis. Someone before you paid for you, no meter. You get to pay forward for people after you. Who pays for it? Which foundation, which development agency? He says, I'm just one person, and I believe in people, I believe in love. I believe that when you evoke people's empathy, they respond. I have faith in that. And does it work? He says, yes, sometimes people take advantage of it. He says, yes, sometimes people pay more. On average, I roughly make the same amount. But that's not the value of it. That's just the economic ledger. The value of it is what I asked them how they felt when they sat in my rickshaw. The value are the inner transformations that happen in people when they learn generosity, philanthropy from a rickshaw driver who believed in them, who believed in their generosity, who had faith that their empathy would be evoked. Becomes very powerful. This is the second shift. Transaction to trust. Third is isolation to community. Oh, I was talking about isolation to community. So isolation, this was a third shift in the sense that you are not just, it's not just me. You sit in a rickshaw, it's not an experience around me. Because usually it's my money, which I've worked hard for. I need to go from there to there. It's all me, me, me. Now this rickshaw driver, he needs my money, and so he will serve me. And I go there, I'll give him my money, he'll give me the change, and I will go and do my business. Extremely me-oriented approach, whereas here it's a we-oriented approach. You receive a gift, you say, wow, someone before me paid for me. There is someone who cares for me who doesn't even know me. And then you say, I get to pay forward in gratitude. No one is forcing me, it's voluntary for people actions. What's the impact of that? It starts to shift from me to we. And the last thing is you start shifting from scarcity to abundance. It's not just, oh my God, there's so little. Everything's going to run out. You know, after the Japanese tsunami, some incredible things happened, which have never happened anywhere else in the world. Usually after a tsunami, here, India would be a prime example, America too. If there was a tsunami here and there was only 2 packets of Maggi noodles, we would go in and we would grab 2 because you might need that second one tomorrow. In Japan, documented cases of people saying, no, I'll only take half so other people have more. In Japan, $72 million were found in cash that people returned back to the government, said this is not my money after the tsunami. In cash. Wow. They could have just taken it, no one would have known, but they said no, these are our brothers. We believe in honesty. This is not my money. And that kind of thinking, to get to a certain level of what Gandhi would say, we have enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. Right? So if we start shifting from greed to a sense of contentment, then we can come to the place where we say, I'll just take half. Because you know, if I take 2 and one of them is sitting in my pantry, what am I going to do with that other one? I'm going to starve someone else. And I'd rather not have them starve, because them starving is like me starving. So that shift from scarcity to abundance ends up becoming a huge thing as well. So these are the 4 shifts that we talk about. And we manifest service in all kinds of different ways. You can go to ServiceSpace.org to find out more about it. It's a massive ecosystem of many projects. But underneath it, here are the 4 key values. That's what's most important. And they manifest in all kinds of different projects. Projects that perhaps can't even be monetized. You can take globs and globs of money and say, what am I going to do with this? You can solve certain problems, important problems, with money, but there are many important problems that just cannot be solved with money. Like good news. I've talked to the heads of the major newspapers in this country, and they'll all tell you we care for good news. They're good people. It's not like they're evil people, but they just don't know how to monetize good news. Hence, it'll never get on the front page. Kindness. Everybody knows kindness is good. We should have more kindness in the world. Kindness is what makes us human. No portal on the internet for kindness. Why? Because its impact is distributed over a large period of time. So we don't know how to capture that. You go to a venture capitalist and you say, look, invest in my problem. Even if you're a social entrepreneur, invest in my problem. I'm trying to do this. I have a unique solution. And they'll say, okay, sounds good. I'll give it to you. How long will it take to solve the problem? Maybe 5 years, 10 years? Oh, that's really forward thinking. Okay, well, I believe in this idea called patient capital. I'll invest in you. What if it was 20 years? What if the impact takes 20 years or 30? Maybe there's 1 or 2 nice guys in the capital world that will say, okay, fine, I'll invest in that. What if it takes 7 generations? No. If you problems that we have today, random acts of violence, all over the world. Even, everyone knows about Delhi, but even in the United States, in Connecticut, you have a guy picking up a gun, taking 11 bullets, putting them through a 6-year-old. You can say why that happened, very complex problem. Because it's not simple, this caused this, and I take the cause away, the effect is gone. It's many causes that created that one effect. It takes many generations of corruption, of spirit to create such problems, and it's going to take many generations to solve that problem. And capital alone will not be the lever to solve these things. So how do we do this? This is the question, and there's no answer. But this is the question. And this is not an opinion. There are many people who understand. There are tribal societies, Native American communities, who before they cut down a single tree, before they make any collective decision, they ask the question, how is this decision going to affect 7 generations down the road? 7 generations. And we are so used to convenience and me and mine here and now that we don't even know how to think of, we're just not even taught that. What does it mean? That's a very deep view of we. And if we as designers don't know that, how are we going to create solutions that foster a multi-generational solution? So these are not, I don't have answers. These are not answers. But these are questions that we ought to be asking as people, as humanity. I may have like super gone into all you guys can see it on your faces, I'm like, wow. So I wanted to put these guys on the spot, but this doesn't feel like the right time to quite do that. So maybe at some point I'll get to you guys. Sheetal is here. So these are people, there's a whole group of people that are saying, let's create new solutions in new ways, in a 7th generation sort of way, in a way that changes you, not just the world on the outside. Sheetal is one of those people. He turns his whole home, he lives in Pune, turns his whole home into an ashram. Not a traditional ashram, a community space. He says, you can come in, do yoga. You can come in, use the space for meditation. You can come in and do a laughing club, right? You can do all kinds of different things. And Sheetal says, I want to just invest in people. I want to give them a space. And he has some really powerful stories around that. Sushil is here locally in Bangalore. And Sushil says, I want to bring this spirit of giftivism to Bangalore. I run a restaurant. I'm willing to take a chance on this paid-forward idea. Ends up, he actually didn't have to take any chance on it because generosity works, and he has seen it. And I invite him at some later point to share stories around how this idea of paying it forward. There were 150 people there yesterday. I mean, it was a newspaper person came, and they were like, so, love is in the air. Why? And I was like, look, you feel it already. That's enough. Stop using your head, man. Just experience it. Feel the love. Go hug somebody, I gave her a couple of things, and then I said, oh, by the way, your face is smiling, instead of like, I'm investigating what's going on, She's like, oh, you got a smile deck, and you're asking me to, pick up a deck of cards, or rather pick up a card from a deck which each has a kindness idea. And each says smile on top of it, and you're like, before she even picks it up, she's smiling. You climb up the stairs, it says love is all you need is love. And by the 8th step, man, how can you not smile? And then she's saying, but why is love in the air? And she says, this is why love is in the air. And you realize that everyone is paying for each other. So at some point, I'd love to invite Sushil also up and share some stories, and then we'll see. Vinod says, look, Vinod played yesterday. He has a band. And they decided to give everybody the gift of music in this space. Everyone brings their gifts. Everyone brings their assets. He says, we just want to sing our hearts out. And blew everybody away. Right? Little kids would go up, and I think other women too, but we won't go there. Would go up and like take a little flower and say, we just wanted to say thank you. What is the value of that? It doesn't go on any ledger. You can ask about the ledger, but it doesn't go in. And what happens when people start exercising that empathy in these kinds of spaces? What the reward of it? Where's the impact? We're always talking about impact. Impact. That's short term. What if the highest impact is inner transformation? And what if that inner transformation, changing the eyes through which you look at the world, its impact is going to come 7 generations later? What then? Maybe it's both. It's not either or. But yes, you need short-term impact as well. But you can't forget about this multi-generational long-term impact either. So how do we birth that into the world? So these are the questions that we're holding. I would love to hear challenges and thoughts, insights, anything that comes up for you guys. And I would love for our rock stars to, whenever you feel comfortable, to just barge up here and say, this is the time to share the story. So I'll leave it to you guys.
I just had one question.
Yes.
This is attempted in the Annalakshmi series, which was very much there in Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, started from
Sure, I've been there, yeah.
But very sad that this year when I went to Kuala Lumpur, I realized they're all closed up,
Sure, yeah.
It was a very sad thing, but what would be the critical thinking, if you see,
Yeah.
What would have happened in a way that, have you looked at this study, or have you, I don't, because I don't know the main people who are doing it. I am recipient of Annalakshmi, I am not the
Sure.
person who is,
Yeah.
So what would have happened because of which they had to close this giftivism?
Yeah, so they ran, like Karma Kitchen, like Seva Cafe, they also ran a restaurant like this, and the question is, why did they shut down? There might have been many reasons, but I can tell you from our experience what the most critical thing is, and why on paper it won't show up. See, on paper there's this idea of tragedy of the commons. So if you guys all would have heard of this idea that you put anything in the commons, everyone, because we're all selfish, everyone will take advantage of it, and we can never keep anything in the commons. So how is it that you can prevent tragedy of the commons happening from a space like Karma Kitchen? Because at Karma Kitchen, everyone can come in and say, I'm not going to pay, I'm just going to eat, somebody else will pay. And then you have this tragedy of the commons, that you put something in the commons, nobody lives up to that respect, and you have everything going down. But in practice, what you have is a generative element, this inner transformation. What you see in Karma Kitchen, that, for example, very simple example, very measurable example. Karma Kitchen, we orient volunteers. 12 volunteers get together and run the whole restaurant on a Sunday. None of these volunteers have ever, maybe a small percentage might have worked before. Overwhelming percentage, 98%, never worked in a restaurant before. So they come in a circle, half an hour orientation, half an hour getting to know each other, and they operate this whole restaurant. For many months, it was the highest rated restaurant in all of Berkeley, including those fancy places where Bill Clinton goes and has a meal where they have all the fancy waiters that come in from the right side and pour water and all the good stuff, right? And here we are, a bunch of volunteers. And why do people rate it up at the top? Because there's a vibe, because there's people feel it, people have a sensitivity to feel that. So my response to that would be that when you don't have that inner transformation, the whole thing shuts down. And that inner transformation can be created how? That's where you have to use creativity. So we'll have a kindness table on the side. When people sit down, underneath their placemats, we'll have good news. On their table, there will be a notepad where they can write a comment for people who come after them. Their servers are volunteers, and they're smiling. The whole ambiance. Somebody else says, I want to sing a birthday song, and someone else says, I want to sing it in another language. And someone comes and says, I'm an author of a book, and I want to just gift my books. And these kinds of things start happening. It creates an inner transformation. There's a collective inner transformation, and that's what prevents tragedy of the commons. But it's very hard to measure this inner transformation, and so on paper you say, yeah, this is why. And for us, it's a huge advantage because ServiceSpace is all volunteer run, and this inner transformation comes very easily when you're volunteer run. There were 40 volunteers yesterday to run the rest. We were joking that we're going to have, instead of one volunteer for one table or 5 tables, they usually have 2 staff to run the whole restaurant. We're going to have one volunteer for every guest, But people want to give. And when they want to give in that way, even though they may not be perfect in the ways of giving, it creates a kind of connection. And that connection, amplified in a space, is what yields the currency to create something like this.
Of course, in what we study, all the aspects we study, to the end point of it, that in some way or other, human beings have been selfish. And so if you study ecology, how humans have been selfish and destroyed art. And when you study politics, how the bourgeoisie, the businessmen have been selfish, and or how certain communities have oppressed others.
Sure.
This is not a question, just saying that.
Yeah.
How in our education we don't see positive side, we don't see.
It's I asked that question. So there's a couple of responses to that. One is that there's new science now. And saying instead of survival of the fittest, actually it's survival of the kindest. And they've discovered all kinds of remains that show. New York Times did a story 4 weeks ago where they found these remains of people that were 10,000 years ago, or of life. They had vertebrae that was completely bent. There is no way that you could have survived with that vertebrae unless someone else was helping you. And so the whole article was on compassion existing 10,000 years ago. Even if you look at Darwin, he actually did say survival of the fittest. He said survival of the fit. he used the word love so many times. When we take like one singular thing and go at it, So a lot can be said. If you just Google survival of the kindness, you'll see research by many people. But the question is, why don't we hear these things? And if Hitler would have won World War II, our history books would have looked different. It would have been the same history that happened, but history books would have looked very different. And so why is it that you've not heard of this guy in Ahmedabad whose wife got sick and some random person came in and gave a rose to him so he would feel good, and he then decides that every day he's going to get up if his wife gets better, which he did. Every day he's going to buy a bunch of roses and he's going to go to random people in each hospital room and go give a rose, right? Why is it that you've never heard that story? It's an amazing story of somebody doing this every day for decades because one person gave him a rose. And that is kindness, and that we take for granted. So we do need to create mechanisms so we change our story that we've told ourselves. So I don't think people are fundamentally selfish. I understand that current science says that, but I also understand that there's a lot of new science, especially neuroscience in the last 10 years, that talks about what selflessness means and what it means, what happens in your brain when you are kind to someone else. So you would think that if I have money and I spend it on getting something, they've now studied this, so they know all this, especially in the last 10 years in neuroscience. They've discovered that your reward center in the brain, there's a reward center in the brain that says, this was good. That's how we like to do something. So when we have a desire, and I spend money on fulfilling that desire, a certain reward center in the brain lights up and you feel great. Turns out that when you give that money to other people, the same reward centers start firing. Up until 5 years ago, there was no research anywhere on this. This is all like new stuff. But if you listen to the sages, it's very old, right? Those who actually have that experience will tell you, I don't need neuroscience to tell me that I like being kind. I don't need to hear the history books to say, whether human beings are good or bad. I say, look, I feel like being connected to human beings, and I do it over love, and I think it's a very real thing. But for those who are creating these systems, I think there's new science coming out. So yeah, it's a loaded question. I don't know if I have a full answer for it, but I think we need to change, provide new data points so history is not just written by folks who have a certain privilege. Yeah.
I was just wondering what you said, society, like, what do you think the kind of generosity or the feeling of empathy has gone when we hear these stories of scams, killings and all? Do you really think in this era we need like just save a kitchen or save a cafe? I mean, what kind of mechanism do you want to establish in these areas? I mean, when the big things like scams come, and what kind of generosity do you expect from these people? I mean,
from the people in the scam or from us observing the scam?
Both.
Yeah.
But you say there is nothing like selfish word.
No, I didn't say there. Okay, so I understand your question. I'm not saying that selfishness doesn't exist. I can tell you from my own experience, I am selfish. But I can also tell you that I've acted selflessly many times. You can see sociologists have a really hard time figuring out when the Gujarat earthquake happens and a mom goes down to protect her child and holds on and she dies, but her child is alive underneath her because everything crumples. Science cannot tell you why a mom would do that, because she's actually being, sacrificing her own life for someone else. These are very hard questions to answer. But you look at big problems in the world and you say, well, how can generosity solve that problem? So say something like corruption. Big problem. But you look at people like Uday Bhai, who says rickshaw drivers are not corrupt. And he says, I'm willing to, be the change. And he decides to run his whole thing on a gift economy basis. He decides to believe in people and trust people. And you say, how is that going to affect that big change? But see, all those big things that are wrong with the world, it took a lot of small things to create that big thing. And so it's going to take a lot of small things to then undo all of those big things. So yes, we need some strong measures that do short-term impact, But we need to think more holistically and see that there's all these small things that created that problem, and we need to create alternatives that that birth a new paradigm. And what are these alternatives? What Pancho does is what we call giftivism. In very hard settings, he tries to birth the power of generosity and stillness. When many people practice giftivism in a community, you start creating circles of gift, which is called a gift economy. And when many micro-gift economies start emerging, we start to have a gift culture. Where in the villages in India, many years ago, you didn't have shops. You had a store with a bunch of supplies and books, and you had a little can. They call it randukan. You go in, you take what you need, and you leave what its price is. Where would that be right now? I mean, we would go crazy, you know. Indonesia looks at, you know, this kind of concept, karma kitchen and whatnot, and they say, can we have more honesty in our world? Because in our country. And they decided to start 6,000 honesty cafes. It's another story that it may or may not have worked because it was government run, and people say, look, the government, it doesn't matter. You know, I'll just take from the government anyways. You know, they've got enough money. They've taken enough of money. But imagine if you had 6,000 honesty cafes where you are offered your coffee and you're trusted to leave what, you know, where you're exercising honesty, where there's a space where you're trusted to be honest. So how do we create, you know, so how do we solve these big problems? Yes, you need some strong levers to, you know, put a pause to it. But to solve it, I think we're going to need to create a new paradigm. As Einstein said, was it Einstein or Bucky Fuller, one of the two? He says, we cannot solve a problem at the level of consciousness that created it. To shift the consciousness, to create a new possibility. Only then will be done. Otherwise, we'll just change the face of the problem and call it progress, which is what we're very good at doing.
I have a cynical question. You know, the gift.
Cynical question, unlike the other two questions. Let's hear a cynical question.
You know, the gift idea that you are talking about. I went to Seva Cafe and places. You know, it still feels like people come there or do service because someone else has done it for them. So it's still, you know, at the surface level, it's give and take relationship that one way or the other we are promoting. How would you respond to that?
Say more. I'm not sure I understand what you're saying.
Like, you know, my parents have paid for my education.
Yeah.
So then it becomes my obligation to, you know, take care of my parents when they are not productive. Now, in a different setting, someone has paid for my need, and I am obliged, because there is a faceless man, I am obliged to pay for someone else who is again faceless.
Sure.
How do you respond to that?
Yeah, now I understand. You feel guilty. And you say, well, look, you know, like, yeah, I ate, and now I ought to like
I
this.
don't see on the surface the empathy current that you say. I mean, we went there and we, had a free interaction with some of the volunteers also.
Yeah.
And somewhere this threat was quite visible.
Yeah. So there's multiple things going on. When you leave open a possibility like a karma kitchen or say a cafe, people will come at it from the space where they're at. So if I have not received enough in life, I'm going to feel guilty when I receive. And when you feel guilty, you're going to have to learn to process that. But if you have never processed that, the presumption is that when you process it, you'll actually be better off than not having processed it. But there will also be those who are not coming at it from the guilt space. They're coming at it from a space of gratitude. Because their inner ecology is such that they feel like, wow, someone gave. Because there are those too. I agree. There are those who feel guilty. There are those who take advantage of it. But there are many people who say, wow, somebody gave to me and I'm saying yes to this kind of a worldview. I'm willing to pay forward out of gratitude. Not out of guilt, not even referencing. How do you figure out how much to pay forward? You reference how much you receive and then you pay forward. But is that really the only way to pay forward? Right? Do I only give 100 rupees because I feel like I ate 100 rupees worth? Or do you say, look, may my brother have more, here's 200. because I got an experience in gratitude. It wasn't just the food. So how do we value the intangible along with the food? If you just look at the food, you will just pay 100. If you look at the food and the intangible, you are forced to value what is the value of this intangible with the food. And there are those who are completely blown away, for whom the food is just this much and the inner is incredible. And they exercise that, and then they go home and they don't forget that. They go home and say, wow, I remember what that felt like. And I'm going to keep that going. And what is the price of that? And how do you create spaces where those things can exist? So there's a spectrum. And you have to create spaces and designs and systems that allow for this part of the internal ecosystem to go forward in society. Otherwise, we're going to strip our humanity bare of its existence, of our human experience. A lot of it is love. And if you strip it, then you say, look, that doesn't count. What counts is how much you receive, which is just the material, which is just on the outside. Inside, it's okay. We were at the Hospitality School of Management. I learned today. 3 days ago, I was at the Taj in Delhi. You know, when you go there, they do excellent customer service. And they sit at everything, like you need anything, there's like 3 people there, right? And they're all smiling. I learned today that 5-star places, these kids go from hospitality management, they go out and they hate working at the 5 stars. In the chefs, in the kitchens, people, they just slap you. The staff culture is so terrible. This is one of the deans of the hospitality management school is saying a lot of my good kids go to that kind of a culture, they come back and they turn bad kids. They've lost their faith, they've lost their goodness. So how do we create spaces where this goodness can percolate, where this goodness can actually ripple out in the world? We owe it to ourselves to retain that end of the value chain. That's what Sarah got to do? Yeah.
I don't have a question indeed, but then maybe it could take a question form if I can.
No, just give a comment, that's all.
Yeah, maybe that and it could be a form question. See, I agree to this point that humanity and doing selfless service has not lost way, right? Because we in India, still if you go to villages, a larger chunk of the villages you go, you don't have to bother about if someone expires in a home.
Someone is?
If someone is expired at home, then you don't have to bother about the ritual. Schools spend in that ritual, right? There will be community service. All of the community will come up. Same is the case with bead for the haves and have-nots. It is there. I've seen that I've seen that to good side of India, right? And same is the case with marriage also, right? So how do I categorize this as rituals? Like deaths and marriage, they are inevitable, right? And there are people in community services to ensure that cover that up. But in adventures like this, I would call this an adventure, or urban setting. You said the kitchens, right? And all. How do you respond to that if you're I'm under presumption that definitely completely have-nots will not be there. Right? I'm under presumption, I'm presuming. Tell me if I'm wrong. How do you extend that service so that completely have-nots could also be part of that? How do you extend to that? This is not new thing that the community services paying for someone else, even if I don't have something, or maybe that I'll not expect something in reciprocity. That is there in our system. We have this. Just in urban culture, that is a bit missing, but that is still there.
I would say a lot more than a bit. But you're right.
How do you extend this setups to this? For have-nots.
So the thing is, you have to see why we have the have-nots. You look at something like Seva Cafe, you look at the world hunger problem, and you say there's a lot of hungry people and they need food to survive. Very basic, fundamental, before even getting into any gray areas. That feels like black and white. You say, why are people not dying of hunger? 30 years ago, it was because, well, we didn't have enough food. Things have become a lot more efficient now. And we have enough food to feed every single person every single day. And yet, what do countries choose to do? They take a whole bunch of stuff and dump it in the ocean. Why do they dump it in the ocean? To protect the price. For who? For farmers. Where? In their country. So instead of feeding someone else because I have some abundance, because some stroke of nature and I got better rains and I have more supply of something, instead of giving, instead of thinking, oh, those are my brothers on the other side of the world, we say, let them suffer. Because otherwise, these people are going to come and suffer. My own country people will suffer. So we haven't reached a kind of global consciousness. So the problems of the world, yes, if I am hungry, I would love to have food. And I have been hungry before. And I have experienced that. And I would look and say, why aren't people kind? But, so at that time, you want to have food. It's a very real thing. But the longer term solution is not going to come from you giving me, giving me a handout. Because that stops right there. Because tomorrow I'm hungry again. You teach me how to fish, but if you teach me how to fish in the wrong way, that's also not sustainable in the long run. You say, okay, you need a job. But that's also not sustainable because a lot of the jobs just externalize a lot of the costs. So we have to ask deeper questions. We have to be much more nuanced and say, what is it that's going to bring a lot of this back? And for me, it comes down to community. If people are together with each other, I have also experienced how when there's a death, even if you go to certain very dense pockets of like old cities, where you have, like in Ahmedabad, you have old city and new city. If you go to old city, one of my friends' brother just passed away. Unexpectedly, shockingly. Right? He just he had some internal condition, and next morning he's passed away. He knew everybody in the community. Everyone comes. There's this state of chaos. And in it, there's this guy that comes, and he just starts putting the mandap, he starts putting, doing all the different things that you need to do. And you go and you talk to him and you say, this is what my family has been doing as service in this community. I would never pay for it. But you look at progress and you say, well, we should commercialize that guy and codify it. And then what you do is you call up this person and you charge for those services because someone unexpectedly passed away. And this is how you start selling. My dad gets these brochures in mail because the insurance company knows how old he is, and they say, here's your funeral plan, subscribe to it in case your family doesn't take you for it. So these are like awkward, weird things. And so yes, you need relief in the world, but we also need to solve some of these really awkward, weird things that our world is creating. And how are we going to solve them? And for me, the answer is love. But what is love? Love manifests itself as relationships. And what happens when those relationships get connected? Different things happen. And how do we create those circles of influence? Right? Those circles of rich relationships. You can do it in the have-nots, you can do it in the haves. Gandhi's idea of Sarvodaya said there are no have-nots. You start with the fundamental premise that there are haves in the world. Everybody is a have. And what do you do with those haves? You share. And why do you share? For shunyata, for inner transformation. These three things are the essence of Sarvodaya. But essentially it comes down to creating community. Because if we have each other, we are content. We're no longer looking to consume. But when we don't have each other, we're isolated, we consume, and we think that's where our satisfaction is going to come from. And when our satisfaction is not going to come there, we think we have to consume more, and that actually externalizes a lot of the costs. So we get caught up in this catch-22 cycle. So we have to come out of this cycle. You have to do relief work. Sure, if I'm hungry, please feed me. But at the same time, we have to create new patterns, otherwise we're hosts as humanity. And we see this in every way. Even global warming is a perfect example. Everyone knows that we ought to be cooperating and reducing, but no one wants to do it. We can't cooperate as countries. Colossal failure of mankind in Copenhagen. So we need to create a new paradigm. And how is that going to happen? We look at the big problems in the world and say, oh my God, this is too much. I can't solve it. It's too. But what you can do is start connecting with your domestic helpers. What you can do is start connecting with your parents now. So many families, so many people don't even know how to relate to their parents because we live in a culture of convenience. But if we start to create a gift economy there, then we realize how we can garden that circle of gift. And as we have more and more circles of gift, where we're not keeping track, where we're paying forward, we perhaps might even create designs that will be sustained. Otherwise, we just cannot even sustain anything around the gift culture if everyone is a taker. we'll start shifting our consciousness and we'll start creating new patterns and new solutions. So that's a long answer because I don't know if there's a short answer. You need relief, but you also need a cure. And the cure is not going to come from the current system as we've seen in all patterns. If you look at all the data. Does that give you some satisfaction?
The thing is, actually, I want to ask, nowadays, as you are telling that many experts are also telling Maslow's theory of hierarchy has lost its relevance.
Yeah.
But the thing is, there are good works in different pockets of the world. Different people are doing these good works. But the thing is, if someone at the ground level who is not getting something which is basic necessity, everything, as pointed by my friend, that in villages still we have this, but community, it works in such a way, those who are prominent people, who are wealthy and somehow they want to be well connected, socialized, these are the people who are doing this through ages, through generation or whatever. But condition of someone who is dependent on other, so when there is some crisis in his family, so he very much depends on that guy, and if he gives something, that he will benefit, otherwise he has to go to some offices to beg for it, to do minimal requirements for his either marriage or funeral, whatever it is. The thing is, kindness was there from the time when need was there, hunger, everything, it shifted from agrarian to some industrialization, everything. The thing is, whatever you are doing or you are associated with, it may be possible that it transforms certain part of our society, but to take it to a level where really this thing becomes practically acceptable, what is your take on it, how it might transform? I'll give one example, if there is some officer who is going to deliver some social or delivery of some mechanism where some poor people will benefit. So being at that level, after achieving that level, he is able to provide some services because that's his duty or job. But being a person who is just from his personal front, he has limitations. So these things achieving something, it sounds good in certain pockets, but as a practicality in entire world, how it will be possible?
Good question, and there are a lot of smart people who have asked that question. Right? How do you do community development with compassion first? There's a guy, John McKnight. He has this idea called ABCD, asset-based community development, not deficit-based. So usually we go into a community and we say, what are the problems? And then we're just looking at the problems and we try to bring solutions. And those solutions end up creating 3 other problems. And so we stay employed as development workers. But that community doesn't really get uplifted. So he says, what if you go in and you start and you say, what are the assets? Right? What are the gifts of this community? What Pancho did, he didn't say this community is broken because you're hearing gunshots all the time. He said, what do we have? He realized we have apples. Let's use those apples to come together as a community and gift those to other people. Throws Maslow's thing upside down. Anna Hazare. I don't know if you know Anna Jiva, before this whole corruption movement, he actually was suicidal. At a train station, he picks up a booklet by Swami Vivekananda, and he says, wow, this is great. I'm not going to kill myself. Let me go dedicate my life to service. He goes in his village. He said, where should I go? He says, I'll go to my village, where I was from. Everyone is drunk there. There's so many problems. He uplifts that village with a very interesting rule. He said, I'm not going to take money from outside. If we want to build a school, we'll build it with local labor, with local material, with local interest. And when people build it that way, they all came. You didn't need to have propaganda to get people to come to your school. So he became a model village, but it was slow. It took time. So we have so many examples of asset-based community development, of looking and not saying, oh, this is broken. Because when you look at it and say this is broken, it's from our perspective. We're saying, oh, you need to be uplifted because you need to be like me. Because look, I'm happy. Actually, we're all miserable. And not just you and I, even those who are far up above. They're equally miserable. It's just that the face of the problem is very different. So we look at them and we say, first we need to bring you to our level of misery and then we'll solve the problem. And what this is saying is, let's not do that. Let's go in with humility and say, what are the assets that they have? And if we look for that, And perhaps we find solutions. And perhaps we even find that we go in and we actually transform ourselves more than them transforming them, which has been my experience. When we were on the walking pilgrimage, I learned generosity, I learned community, I learned love from those people on the ground who had nothing, and they'd come up to you and say, here, can I give you this? Why? How? You know? So these examples are there. We just have to probe a little deeper. So I would say it's extremely practical. If you look at Vinoba Bhave, height of practical. Vinoba Bhave did what is unthinkable around the world, 5 million acres of land. He said, you are a rich landowner, you are a landless landowner. You are brothers and sisters. Please give to this person. And they did, and he moved on. 5 million acres of land. We take small pockets of land. 5 million acres is like bigger than all the countries, so many countries in the world, right? We take smaller pieces of land and fight for decades. But here was Vinoba Bhave, extremely practical, yet just talking about love. He said the essence of my work, and this is somebody that Gandhiji, we would have no independence, we wouldn't even have this conversation if it wasn't for Gandhiji. Because we would be in a very different world. Gandhiji says, Satyagraha is the essence of my work. First Satyagrahi is Vinoba Bhave. And what does Vinoba Bhave say? Vinoba Bhave says the whole essence of my work was to connect hearts to each other. You think he wasn't smart, you think he didn't, he should have gotten think tanks, he should have gotten smart people and said, please don't give to this person, here, give it to me, and I have really smart people and we will decide how to redistribute. He didn't do that. He knew 27 languages, he was an extremely sharp guy. Satyagrahi, first Satyagrahi, that Gandhiji said. Gandhiji looked up to him in many ways. And he says, this is the answer. Maitri is the answer. Love is the answer. Concrete, real. The guy has been to more villages than, I mean, obviously, I don't need to tell you, than any development worker alive today, I'm guessing. So it's very real.
Add that with a caveat that many a times that might not end you, but so what?
That might not.
The compassion,
Yeah.
and the possibility that the compassion has to transform,
Yeah.
might not end it. Let's
My people know Vinoba. Right? Some people think it was a ba. It was like some woman that's like, you know, did something good for India. He said, nobody knows Vinoba, but how many people know Steve Jobs? Steve Jobs has changed the world. You know? It's a real question. You know? But I said, of course, I gave a very strong response to that, as you might imagine. But I say, look, if I have a choice, I could be Steve Jobs, and I'm actually from the Silicon Valley. If I had to choose a path, and I'm neither Steve Jobs nor Vinoba, but I want to be a Vinoba when I grow up. I want to count on love. I want to bring people together. Maybe it doesn't last. So what? I died trying. And I want to die trying doing that than to selling you iPhones. So I agree with you. Like we really shell-shocked them. And I have no idea, you know, I was much nicer in my previous talk. It was like to a whole auditorium, but the vibration takes me, you know. Wait, did you have a mini hand up? No.
I had a story that my son was telling me. A bunch of MIT kids are doing a research project. They're doing a research project in India on the effect of inclusive banking. Now, on community. So inclusive banking is this thing that we're all promoting in India. That it's a big deal. Everybody from Manmohan Singh downwards, encouraging people to have bank accounts and so on. So there's a bunch of MIT economists who are doing a research study here. And they were using game theory and a whole bunch of other stuff. Just one basic hypothesis, and they claim that they proved it. Which is that the moment a person, you go into a village and have a person open a bank account, it kills collaboration.
Yeah.
So normally what happens is you go to the rural community where there are a bunch of people, they're all farming, and some guy has a bad crop, somebody has a good crop. They normally pitch in and they help each other. Some guy who has a good crop is helping the other guy, and the guy who doesn't have a good crop is receiving benefits. That's been the way it has been for centuries. Right? So now you go and tell the guy, here, you open a bank account. And they're selling insurance stuff. But when they go and say a bank account and tell the guy, now you can start saving. He says the moment you tell the guy you can start saving, from that point on, they stop helping anybody else. Right? And they start collecting, putting money into the bank, and the guys who are smarter get more money in their accounts, and the guys who are not so smart or not in good shape don't get enough money. And so their whole contention is inclusive banking actually is going to kill communities across the developing world. By just making people open bank accounts and bringing the whole idea, you're going to not only kill collaboration, you're going to create a divide between the rich and the poor in that village. Right? But the momentum is completely against it. World over, we're fighting a losing battle. If you're taking the approach that you're taking, you're fighting a losing battle because the momentum is completely against it. All supposed economic wisdom, social wisdom is moving down there. Right? So what do you have to say about it? And what's the so? So where do you go from?
I agree. I also understand that the momentum is against it. I think there's only one response and say, look, I have two choices. You and I both have two choices. All of us have these two choices. Do you say momentum is too much, I submit to it? Or do you say I want to create a new way? I'm saying I want to create a new way. I don't know what that new way is because you shine your light in this. There's research, you don't even have to go to bank account. There's research that shows that you put an airport in a community that reduces the ties in a community. So we start to create these kinds of worlds without thinking much about it. And even if you increase your commute time, that reduces your community time. That affects how you connect with your family. But when Tata says, look, Tata is a good company compared to the other corporations, and ServiceSpace is doing a good job. But at the same time, when they say we're going to come out with nanos, are they thinking, who is even asking that question, how having extra nanos increases the traffic in Bangalore, which is going to increase the commute time, which is going to reduce your intangible family time and community, So these are many degrees of separation that you do have, incredible momentum going against us. But we have to find innovative ways. And one of the innovative ways, one of the things that gives me hope, is the internet. Is the properties of the internet and how movements are able to catalyze without a center, without funding. So there's a famous book called Black Swan. Everyone thinks swans are always white. White swan, white swan, white swan. We are so smart as humanity, white swan. One day, Australia, there's a black swan. Everything we knew was wrong. So this book chronicles, the New York Times best-selling book, chronicles how we've had zero clue about all the major events that have affected human history. So we look at a problem like this, and it looks incredibly challenging. But what is the black swan solution? If Microsoft, when it was a $500 billion company, saw Google when it was very small and knew that they would displace them, they would have crushed it, but they couldn't see it coming. So what is that not coming for us? How do we see the Arab Spring? Never before in human history has a leaderless movement displaced something that's gone on for 40 years. The Egyptian government. I mean, how do you explain that? Of course, there are a lot of explanations, and I'm involved in creating some of those explanations. But, so we post-mortem is great, right? We say, oh yeah, rearview mirror, everything, I know exactly how this happened, but actually we may not. So what is that black swan solution? I want to be a part of that black swan solution that says even trillions of dollars, and lots of momentum can flip it. I don't know what that solution is, but I'm trying, and maybe I'm going to be the 18th monkey. You know about the 100th monkey experiment? You guys, I mean, maybe you've studied it, but basically they were trying to teach a bunch of monkeys how to solve a certain problem. Couldn't do it. 100 monkeys all over the world, they had cameras on them. One day, one guy figures it out, next day, all 100 know. And this is not such a far-fetched idea. Even cancer, there's this idea called, there's this actual thing that happens, I forget the exact percentage, but it's a significant percentage, of people who go into this state of extreme cancer and they have spontaneous remission. You can Google it. I have cancer today, completely incurable, tomorrow it's gone. And doctors don't know how to explain it. I think it's between 5 and 15%. It's a very significant percentage. So we see that humanity is far more complex than how our minds have captured it. And so what are the black swan solutions? And I'm optimistic that I think the internet in its new capacities gives us the opportunities to create these new things. And I'm involved in ServiceSpace, I think, is my response to it. Like I'm putting my chips on that.
So a follow-up question to that is, much as any of us will intuitively like the idea and intuitively relate to what we're talking about, is there something that any of us can do, one or more of us can do, that sort of turns the tide? What will turn the tide? What are the kinds of things that you've tried, you've seen in pockets or other ways that help turn the tide?
So, like, for example, having a Seva Cafe here. First, I would say you should go and volunteer there. Because that will turn your inner tide. Not just yours, anyone, right? It'll start to give you hope in humanity in a very different way. Honor the inner transformation. When we did Karma Kitchen, there was a volunteer that came one time and said, wow, this is amazing. She goes and tells her professor. Professor comes, says, wow, this is not what we teach at Berkeley Business School, Haas School of Business. And he says, we need to study this, because clearly it's working. 25,000 meals, people have paid forward. So they go into a cartoon museum and they say, instead of charging you $1, we're going to charge you, we're going to let you pay what you want. So people on average paid more than $2. I said, wow, that was amazing. Now, let's do it Karma Kitchen style. Not just pay what you want, which is rooted still in me, you pay forward. So we ask you to exercise your empathy. Someone before you paid for your cartoon museum fare, you pay forward. People on average pay $3.12. Never before any educational institution has done that kind of research. So why is this even possible? And why is this feasible? And how does the internet play into it? So it's possible because previously these would be all scattered beads. But now the internet allows you to connect these scattered beads. And it allows you to connect it with very little transaction cost. This is why we see movement. Previously, Ford Foundation, for them to give a $49,000 grant, they would never do it. $49,000. Why? Because their overhead is $50,000 to give any grant. So they clearly would. But there's a lot of value to $49,000. But we just didn't know how to organize in a new way. So instead of going from 18 to 20% organizational overhead, we've now shrunk it down, the internet, 0 to 1. This changes the whole game. And so how do we organize for constructive work? If you look at, we call it the Gandhi 3.0 model. So Gandhi 1.0 is one Gandhi and many of us. Gandhi 2.0 is Vinoba, one Vinoba still, but constantly moving, so one-to-one connection. Gandhi 3.0, which is the era we're in, is many to many. Many Gandhis in many places, loosely connected by the internet, previously not possible. So that possibility didn't even exist, although both Vinoba and Gandhi said that. So if you study networks and value of networks, you can see how this would spike up, but it was not possible because we were not connected. Now we are. But we have to organize in a very different way. It's no longer about being the head honcho, about everything going through you. It's saying, you are the next Gandhi, It doesn't work like that. It takes very different leadership because it's different times. And it's very hard, just as YouTube could have never birthed, rather NBC, I don't know what's a big station here, but any TV station could have never birthed a YouTube. I was in the Valley, these were all my peers that birthed YouTube, right? They were a bunch of 20-somethings trying to do something revolutionary. Their minds didn't know that this couldn't be done. But they ended up creating a whole new revolution. So I think it takes a very different kind of mindset. And so this revolution is going to come from many people in many ways, loosely connected by the internet. That's why when Oprah comes up to us and we have these smile cards, which did I talk about smile cards? I haven't even talked about smile cards. But we have these smile cards which tell everyone to do a small act of kindness and you pay forward. Don't let the chain stop with you. By itself, nice, one little act. But when you have millions of them floating around the world, it all of a sudden starts to create a whole new narrative. But when Oprah comes and says, great, we'd love for you to be on Oprah, right? And this is when she had her TV show. Huge influence. Anyone would die for that kind of coverage. We say, no. Because that starts to shift us to the Gandhi 2.0 and maybe the 1.0 model. This is the 3.0 world. So we're double downing on this 3.0 vision of many to many, and that means designing in a very different way. Yes. I'm totally keeping you guys over time, but I'm happy to go with it because I have to catch a bus in 2 hours.
I would be very interested to see how this works in a culture like ours, because I see this from a Western model. I see that, you know, responding very differently. Like, for example, the kind of communities that still there, where Annadan, Vastadam, this, that, everything is premium. And we have about 10 programs in our community. Every Sunday, every Saturday, you know, things like that. But the agenda of each person who will come there will be very different. Each one has some other agenda. It looks like as though you're supporting community building, coming together, doing things and everything. But each one has their own other agendas, you know. Some will have their own prestigious agenda, some will have need to network, some will have, you know, something to show up, some will have their power which is not being used elsewhere to be everything. So when there are multiple agendas, but these things have been kind of practices which have come and they've used this practice for other things. I would definitely like to see how the whole thing, it's not like there's dearth for, you know, want to give or things like that. Well, want to give itself shows you who you are, puts you up in a community in a different space and gives you other things. Then, you know, it comes from that selfishness angle. Very difficult to transcend that because...
I think part of the problem is the systems itself. So we were saying the other day, like NGOs have become EGOs, right? So you're just a lot of egos, and a large part of that is money. Because if I start cooperating with you, then we have a similar funding source. It's going to, you know, I mean, these things are very practical and real. And actually, the large part of all problems in society is money. If you look at money, it basically is issued as debt. And when it's issued as debt, basically it says that you guys have to fight to make, you know, to make up for that debt. And which also implies that you need infinite growth. And what if nature doesn't allow you to have infinite growth? Nature is finite, you have finite resources, so how can you have infinite growth? You cannot. Which means at some point, things have to crumble. So this technology of money, this monopoly of issuing money, has to be distributed and decentralized, which Brazil has realized. So they have said, the reason why we have a centralized money system is because it's extremely efficient. Efficiency is great, but it's also very brittle. So you need resiliency. And so Brazil says, look, in your local community, you guys have a local currency. And you start matching. And the government itself is encouraging local people to connect. But if a government even gets scared, just as NGOs get scared, it's like me and mine, they say, oh my God, no, this is my monopoly. Now those guys don't really need me. And then I'm in, you know, how can I control them? Then all of a sudden you're going to have problems and they're not going to let them. But if we realize that in life you need a balance between efficiency and resiliency for optimum work, then we'll start to create these complementary currencies as well. So it's not just systems, it's like the system of money altogether.
Wait too much to see how that transcends.
You and I, we got to be a part of it, man. So I think we're keeping a bunch of people beyond their schedule, so I'm here to share. These guys are here. I really would have loved to put you on the spot, but I just didn't have a proper introduction to put you there. And I would recommend that all of us go out and do acts of kindness. Connect with each other, you know, connect with these guys. Doing Seva Cafe, say yes to that possibility. Say yes to the possibility of like a person saying, I'm opening up my home, making it a community space in Pune. Say yes to whatever assets we have. If we all connect and are with each other, it creates a new possibility. And maybe one of them is the black swan. You know, who knows? Maybe you help me, I help you, or we help each other and a third person ends up creating that. It's all good, you know. So let's all come together. We have a bunch of smile cards, the only amount that we have left. That it'd be great if all of us go out and do a small act of kindness. There's also a smile deck. These are like small little tools that we can use to connect with our own inner transformation, which I think is probably our only ray of hope. But it's a very good ray of hope. It's an unmistakable strength and something that keeps me very optimistic. So thank you guys for allowing me to throw a monkey wrench. And I'm here for a little bit if you want to chat.
Thanks, Nipun. When that time I hadn't known about you, so I quickly did all the Googling and checking and all that. I found it very interesting. And I found the whole thing very fascinating. I have some questions, but I said, let me hold off my questions since others in the audience might. So, those who want to stay behind, you have a little time to...
Yeah, I do.
What time are you off?
I have to catch a bus in a little bit and eat dinner before that, but yeah, I'll be happy to stay for another 15-20 minutes. And I would urge you guys to connect with these guys because I'm in a many-to-many world, man. It's not like, I just got questions, but let's all connect with each other and give each other a warm hug. Thank you.
So thank you.
Yes. But we can definitely chat. No, I don't know why don't we create a little circle here?
Yeah, sure.
We just sit on the ground.
Yeah.
Is that awkward?
No, that's fine. There are some of us whose knees don't bend that much.